This is Steve Fidel, former linebacker for the University of Pittsburgh Panthers and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you're listening to the Total Sports Recall Podcast, a part of the Sports History Network. Now here's your host, Harv Aronson.
Welcome to the Total Sports Recall Podcast, and today I welcome a fellow Sports History Network podcaster, Joe Zagorski. Joe's show is called Pro Football in the 1970s, which hits home for me as I was growing up in Pittsburgh during that decade. Joe Zagorski is a veteran of the United States Army who also was a school teacher, a park ranger, and a sports writer for 2 Pennsylvania newspapers. Joe is a member of the Pro Football Writers of America and the Pro Football Researchers Association. Joe authored 4 books, all with content regarding the history of pro football. Joe's first book was The NFL in the 1970s, Pro Football's Most Important Decade, which received accolades from the Library Journal as one of the top 10 football books in America for 2016. Joe's second book, The Year the Packers Came Back, Green Bay's 1972 Resurgence, we labeled one of the top Christmas books for Packers fans in 2019 by the Milwaukee Record. 1 year later, the book America's Trailblazing Middle Linebacker, the story of NFL Hall of Famer Willie Lanier, was released, also written by Joe Zagorski. It recounted the exploits of Lanier, who was the first full-time African-American middle linebacker in the history of pro football. A fourth book written by Joe, a biography of former Philadelphia Eagles free safety Bill Bradley, has been written, but is waiting for a publisher. In 2021, Joe won the Pro Football Researcher Association's Hay Award, presented for Lifetime Achievement for Pro Football Research and Historiography. 2 years later, Joe was awarded the PFRA's Bob Carroll Memorial Writing Award. Joe Zagorski is also a contributing writer for the Pro Football Journal website and for the Facebook page, The NFL in the 1970s. He began that Facebook page several years ago, which now has over 7,000 followers. Joe got his feet wet in screenplays as writing the 2001 script for Town Teams. Joe was born and raised in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, but currently lives in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So, Joe, welcome to the Total Sports Recall, and it's always a pleasure to have someone on that is familiar with my era and a decade I consider the greatest ever for sports.
Well, thank you, Harv. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here.
Fantastic. So let's begin with your book, The NFL in the 1970s. Of the 10 years in the decade, my team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, won 4 of those Super Bowls played in that time frame. The Dallas Cowboys were also one of the stronger teams of the 70s, as were the Oakland Raiders. In your opinion, what are some of the most significant moments for the NFL from 1970 to 1979?
Wow, that's a loaded question, Harv. There's so many great ones. I mean, you can start back to at the beginning, 1970, Tom Dempsey's famous 63-yard field goal for the Saints to beat the Lions. And then, of course, all the different, great playoff games and Super Bowl games. Being a Steelers fan yourself, the Immaculate Reception comes to mind in 1972. Of course, in 75, you had Roger Staubach's Hail Mary pass for the Cowboys against the Vikings. And then, of course, the dynasties from that era. You mentioned, of course, the Steelers, and they certainly had one of the greatest dynasties of all time, but so did the Miami Dolphins during the early 70s. The NFL's only undefeated team, even to this very day, the only perfect team. And, of course, the Cowboys, the Oakland Raiders. There's so many different great events and so many controversial events, too, from the 1970s. Questionable calls, of course, Immaculate Reception, but there was also Mel Renfro's, his last name was Mike Renfro's catch in the 79 and an AFC Championship game, which helped to bring about instant replay in the NFL. So many different things that happened in the 1970s, and even though my book on that era was well over 440 pages, I couldn't list everything. The publisher, McFarland and Company, they had very small print size as far as the type size of the print to get more words in, and I if that book was of a larger print size, it would be 800 pages long. There's
Wow.
just so many things that happened in 1970s that and people are still talking about today.
Oh yeah, and I'll always hold to my opinion that that was the best era in sports ever. And recently, I had Michael McCambridge, an author, on, and he wrote a book about the 1970s. And his book was like a Bible. And when I interviewed him, I was like, I haven't not been able to get through your entire book. There's so much information. And I told him it was like an encyclopedia. He was kind of honored by that. He said, well, I don't know if I'd refer to that, but it really was like an encyclopedia. There were so many great events. And you mentioned the Immaculate Reception. So I had Terry Hanratty on the show at one point, and it was interesting getting his perspective because he was on the field. He was able to see it right up close. And I was telling him back then, you'll remember that in the 70s, they had the blackout rule. So being in Pittsburgh, if your home team did not sell out the game, it was not allowed to be televised in your city.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to listen to the game on the radio. And so, yeah, and it was just crazy not being able to actually see the play take place. But the other interesting thing when you mentioned Miami Dolphins is that was the Immaculate Reception came in the same year as the undefeated season for the Dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
And I always said to myself that, Steelers played them in the AFC Championship and came very close to beating them. And had it been a couple of years later, maybe they would have. But so, Dolphins are the only team to go undefeated, but they had a close call with the Steelers in that championship game.
I talked to both Rocky Blyer, who wrote the foreword to my book, and I also got a chance to interview Joe Green about the Immaculate Reception. They both had two very, very different points of view. I asked Rocky, what did he see? And he said, nothing. I had my back turned. I couldn't watch it. And then I asked Joe Green, and he said, Franco caught the ball, and I ran down the sidelines as fast as I could and almost got close to the point of getting to the goal line while the play was still happening. And
wow.
So, Joe Green was pretty much adamant. He was hoping that they didn't lose. Of course, they were losing to the Raiders at that time, and that play happened, and it changed pro football. It changed the sport.
Uh-huh. And Terry Hanratty was making the point, two things that, one, he said, John Madden took that to his grave, that he swore that was an illegal play. And Frenchy Fugal came up, and the fact that he has not yet revealed his personal opinion of whether or not the ball hit him or hit, I think it was Jack Tatum. And he says he'll go on speaking tours and talk about it, and then he'll try to lead people up to believing he's going to tell them what happened, and then he doesn't. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, it's, and there's so many great plays from that decade that, I just knew I had to write a book about it.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to look at that book and take a read to that because that is my favorite era. So another one of your books, The Year the Packers Came Back, reminded me of a player I remember very, very well from the 70s, running back John Brockington. I'm sure you covered him in your book. He was an outstanding runner, having rushed for over 1,000 yards each of his first 3 seasons in the NFL. And sadly, I just learned he passed away in March of this past year.
You're right.
He played for 2 head coaches, Dan Devine, Bart Starr. All 3 have passed away. What are your thoughts about authoring this book and John Brockington?
Well, when I talked to the players of that team, I knew that Dan Devine, the head coach, was really not the caliber of a type of a head coach like a Chuck Noll or a Don Shula, those type of guys. But I couldn't believe all of the disdain that I was hearing from guys like John Brockington and Dave Robinson and Scott Hunter. They were telling me, and it wasn't anything contrived. They lived through this, and it was almost as if the coach was, not really coaching the team, but he was not helping the team. And when Bart Starr was finally given the reins of the offense by Coach Devine, that's when they started winning. And they did really well. They went on a great winning streak. They beat several teams that were in the playoffs the previous year, including the defending world champion Dallas Cowboys. But once they got into the playoffs, they ran into the Redskins, and right before that game, that was when Dan Devine decided to take the reins back from Coach Starr and call the offensive plays himself. And that was the doom. That spelled the doom for the Green Bay Packers, because that was a game that they should not have lost. With their rushing attack, and with the fact that if Scott Hunter had been allowed to throw the ball more to his backs, MacArthur Lane and John Brockington, Washington would have came out of their 5-man defensive front, and the game would have been different. So they were a little, Brockington and his teammates, they were kind of upset that they couldn't have gone further.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting when you mentioned Dan Devine, because he was also a head coach at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just made me think of that when I saw his name. There's something that came up in the Hanratty's interview as well, because obviously he's from Notre Dame. But I had asked him the question at the end. We were talking about the movie Rudy, and I asked him whether you met the real Rudy Rudiger or not, and he said briefly he has. I said, well, how factual do you think that movie actually was? And he said a lot of it is glorified by Hollywood. He said, first of all, he said nobody's ever been carried off the field at Notre Dame. So the ending scene, he said, that's just fiction. He said maybe some buddies of his carried him off the field or something. He said, but no way the teammate's going to carry him off. Secondly, when they all turned their jerseys into the coach to make him play, I'm pretty sure Dan Devine was the coach at the time. I think that's what he said when Rudy was there. And he said there was no way Dan Devine would have allowed that to happen. He said, if you would have turned your jersey in, you would have been off the team. So that made me laugh.
Yeah, when they were making that movie, the Devine family, and I had this on good authority from both Dave Robinson and from Chuck Lane, I believe his name was, who was a public relations director for a time in Green Bay, that the Devine family was very upset with Hollywood for producing this film, and they apparently threatened them with a lawsuit, and the producers said that if they tried to do that, they would include many other derogatory stories in the film that were proven true, and the Devine family backed down. So it was even worse than what you could imagine.
Wow. So I imagine he probably was upset seeing the scene with the jersey scene, because like Hanratty said, he would have never permitted that.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've never heard that side of the story. So it's very interesting. So what inspired you, Joe, to write the book on Willie Lanier?
It's a funny story how it came about. I was on my way driving up to Canton, Ohio to do some research, and I pulled over at a truck stop, and I got an email from a friend of mine that works at NFL Films, who has also authored many great pro football books, Chris Willis. And he told me that his publisher, Roman and Littlefield, were looking for another book. And I pitched this idea of the first full-time middle linebacker in the NFL to them about Willie Lanier. And they liked the idea. And so I decided to write about Willie Lanier. Now, the problem with this was that I tried to interview Willie Lanier on 3 separate occasions. And each time he told me no, he wasn't interested.
Huh.
So I had a lot of factual information, published information anyway to go with, but the book could have been so much better if I had had his cooperation in with it.
Sure.
I haven't had that problem since. currently writing I finished just recently writing a book on former Hall of Fame offensive guard Larry Little of the Miami Dolphins, which is it's going to be published probably sometime either next year or early the year after, early in 2025. And
very good.
And I had nothing but cooperation from Larry Little. So
wow.
Yeah. So the Willie Lanier's book was something that it was a learning thing for me, because I didn't realize that I should have spoken to him before I even pitched the idea to the publishers. So.
Interesting. I'm glad you're keeping the 70s alive with all these books. That's excellent, because there's so much history from that decade, even before that. But it's interesting about your story with Willie Lanier, because I graduated from North Hills High School in Pittsburgh, and I've had several former football players that played there on my podcast, and I tried to get Mark Kelso to come on. The Buffalo's player. Buffalo Bills player played for my high school, and I wrote him a letter, and he declined as well, just like Willie Lanier. He just said respectfully declined. So sometimes you run into that.
And then this book that I wrote that's going to be published pretty soon on former Philadelphia Eagles safety Bill Bradley. Not only did I get a chance to interview him 12 different times over the phone, but I also drove out to Texas to meet him and to have, fun talking with him and his wife. And, so you get all different types, and sometimes they're really, interested in the project, and sometimes they aren't. And that's the way it is.
Exactly. And that's funny you mentioned Bill Bradley, because that's going to be my next question. Tell us a little bit more about the book, even though it hasn't been published yet, on Bill Bradley.
It's going to be published by Highlander Press of Baltimore, Maryland, either this time next year or early the year after. And he's the most unique person that I've ever interviewed in my entire life, because of the stories that he told. I had heard through not a friend, but just somebody that I happen to know, and I can't even remember the guy's name because it happened so many years ago. But he said that Bill Bradley of the Eagles was looking to get his story written. So I found Bill. I contacted Bill and asked him if he's. Here's how unique he is. I sent him a copy of my first book on the 1970s in the NFL. And then I called him up and I contacted him and I asked him, "Are you interested in letting me write your story?" And he goes, "Well, I looked on the index of your book that you sent me, and it had my name and some of my information was on page 28 on your book. So because I wore number 28, I'm going to say yeah." So that's
that's funny.
So, and the stories that he told were just incredible.
I'm sure,
but they're true. And I mean, he once had an opportunity to have a private breakfast with the President of the United States, and he shows him up. He showed up Lyndon Johnson in order to go out with a girl that he just met. I'm not making this. And then he almost got thrown out of a game at the University of Texas during the opening coin toss. He almost killed Daredevil Evel Knievel by giving him a ride on the back seat of his father's pickup truck.
Oh my!
This stuff that he is just he impersonated an NFL scout in order to get a job as an assistant coach after he retired. He was once beaten up by members of his own team.
Oh, no.
And speaking of getting beaten up, he was almost beaten up in Las Vegas by Frank Sinatra's bodyguards for being accused of throwing a vegetable and hitting Sinatra in his cheek while he was singing his signature song, "My Way."
Oh
Um,
no!
I'm not making this. This is straight from Bill Bradley, and I'm thinking,
Did he
well,
actually throw the vegetable? Was it him?
no, no, it was his buddy. It wasn't his friend. The second
Oh my
person
gosh!
always gets blamed. And
What, they
so,
didn't like Frank Sinatra or something?
no, it had nothing to do with that. I mean,
Yeah.
oh, he also got a chance to go and take a tour of the Graceland mansion of Elvis Presley, and he walked down in the basement and got a chance to watch television with Elvis.
Oh, you're
It,
kidding
it,
me!
no, no, this
Wow.
is. Remember that shooter at the Texas Tower at the University
Of
of
course.
Texas, that
Yeah.
Whitman guy?
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
Bradley was there during that, and he was ducking behind a pillar.
No
This is
way.
yeah, yeah. I
Wow.
mean,
I think the guy's name was Whitman or something.
yeah, Whitman,
Did
Charles Whitman,
yeah, Charles
and,
Whitman. Yeah.
and these are just some of many different things that Bill Bradley has done throughout his life
Wow.
that are all in the book. And it was the funnest book I've ever written because of just listening to these stories and thinking, this is a great story.
Wow,
I
man,
couldn't.
you should be proud, Joe, to be the one that's writing the story. I mean, that's
Well,
crazy.
it was. Here's the hard part: was that hardly, a lot of people. Two hard parts. One, everybody confuses him with Bill Bradley, the former senator and
Yeah.
former basketball player,
Right.
and
Right.
trying to differentiate between the two was tough. But also, we're talking well over 50 years ago. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
even knows about this guy,
Mm-mm.
but he was the first man to ever lead the NFL in interceptions 2 years in a row. Nobody
Wow.
knows about and so it was a joy to write it. It was hard to get a publisher because they just weren't, they always heard, oh, it's not for us. It's not for us.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I finally found a publisher, and hopefully
Mm-hmm.
it'll do well. I mean, because it's
Well,
just such an incredible story.
yeah. I mean, there's
Is like,
sports fanatics by the millions out there, and many of them are from our era. So there's definitely an audience for it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you talk to anybody that grew up in that area and knows football, they're going to know who Bill Bradley was. So, I
yeah,
mean, I knew his name right away.
if they're
He
like
was a
us,
linebacker, wasn't he, Joe?
he was a safety.
Safety. Oh, for some reason I thought he was a linebacker.
Well,
I
the
didn't
title
realize
of the
it.
book is Free Spirit at Free Safety, the incredible but
Wow.
true football journey of Bill Bradley. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, those stories are going to be fun to read. That's for sure. I mean, those are
Yeah, I'm
crazy
looking
stories.
forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also wrote a book about the '73 Buffalo Bills,
Okay.
the team that O.J. Simpson broke the 2,000-yard barrier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's going to be coming out early next year, hopefully.
Oh, you're a busy man. My
Tell me
goodness.
about it. Well, with the Facebook page, the NFL in the 1970s, I'm almost at 10,000 followers, so
Wow.
it's
That's
getting up there.
well. We'll get to all that social media stuff at the end. 2
Okay.
years ago, Joe, you won the Hay Award, as mentioned in the introduction. What did you receive for winning that award? And tell us about the pride and your accomplishments that came with it.
I don't really remember receiving anything other than the fact that I got my name listed in the periodical for the Coffin Corner as, winning the award for lifetime achievement in writing about pro football. I don't remember receiving anything other than that.
Well,
You
from
know,
all the sounds of all the writing you're doing, it sounds like it was well deserved.
well,
But you
thanks.
also won the Bob Carroll Memorial Writing Award. And what was the basis for that honor being presented to you?
I won $100 for that. And
That's
yeah.
fun.
It was about a story that I wrote about the 1974 NFL players strike, which was
Wow.
probably one of the best articles that I ever wrote for their publication. I interviewed Terry Hanratty, your buddy.
Yeah.
I interviewed Phil Villapiano, linebacker for the Raiders. Mercury Morris, running back for the Dolphins, and a few other players about that strike. And we talked about it at length, and their opinions were kind of different. And especially at the end when I asked who won that player strike. Did the owners win it? Did the players win it? And they all had different answers. And it was a very interesting time because I remember it as a kid growing up. Well, why aren't the players, practicing? Well, they have rookies and free agents practicing, and they're called scabs. And I'm thinking a scab is something I pick off of my arm after a cut or something.
Yeah.
No, and so it was a very interesting. And I remember, I mean, my father was a steel worker growing up, and he would take me to these union meetings, and they were. I heard a lot of brand new curse words at the union meetings. That I couldn't even use in school, a Catholic school, because you weren't allowed to curse. I mean,
sure.
But it got me into a mindset of thinking there's a story here about this strike it lasted, I believe, 42 days, where the veteran players were out there with picket signs, no freedom, no football. And I remember when I visited Bill Bradley, he showed me he still has a T-shirt that says that he wore during the strike. Yeah.
Wow.
And, and he also told me a story about, the guys that crossed the picket lines at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them were forgiven, but some of them were not forgiven by their veteran friends on the teams. And that was a separate story in and of itself. So that's why how I won that award. Yeah.
Wow. That makes me wonder if that was the inspiration for the movie. I think it was Replacements with Keanu Reeves. Is that the name of it?
I think that was the 87 strike or the 82 strike, I believe it was. Or the 87. It was either 8 or 2. There were so many different strikes. This one that I wrote about was in 74, but there were two. The 82 one was the longest one in duration. The 87 strike only lasted a few weeks, but it was during the regular season. And the owners were ready for it, and they brought in these replacement players, and that's where the movie came from. I'm pretty sure that was the 87 strike.
Wow. And it's football. It's not just limited to football with these strikes. I know baseball's had some historic strikes. I think hockey, the entire season got wiped out a few years ago because of a strike. It's not unfamiliar.
If any of your listeners don't think that pro sports, they're not a business, it's a business.
Oh,
it's a game, but it's becoming so much of a business. It's a $1 billion industry, several $1 billion.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I think in today's day and age, it's way more business than I think it was when we grew up. Back then the rules were so much different, as we all know. And, the game was a lot more vicious than it is today. Although I did have some disagreements with some of my guests that it's still not a physical game. Of course, it's still a physical game, but I don't think it compares to what we got to witness. I think they played back then pre-1980s more for the sport than it was a business. Now it's all business.
Yeah, I mean, the players are much bigger, faster, and stronger today. But back then, the rules were different. If you watch a film of pro football in the 1970s, you'll see guys getting hit where today it's a penalty. There's no doubt about it. It's a penalty. Mm-hmm. And, and back then, especially early in the 70s, steroids were permissible. They're not against the law like they are today. So players, some of them were taking that stuff and getting bigger and stronger. And sadly, it had detrimental effects to their lives later on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Steve Corson was one that came right out and admitted that he was doing it. So, and the Steelers had a reputation of many of their players doing steroids, and a lot of them will deny it. But, there's a lot of people that accuse them of doing that as well. And I think the younger generation today went back and looked at footage of how we knew football back then, they'd be shocked because Terry Hanrad brought it up when we talked about it, the play on Lynn Swann by Jack Tatum, where he gave him a concussion. And I tell you, Joe, to this day, I can still see it happening. It was a running play with Franco Harris, and Swann was standing with his hands on his hips. And for no reason, Tatum just went over and gave him a forearm to the head. Yeah. And I know Chuck Noll wanted to press charges against the guy for assault. And it almost got to that point. I mean, it was brutal back then.
Well, Noll called Atkinson and Tatum a criminal element, and George Atkinson tried to sue Chuck Noll for saying that. Well, the suit was thrown out of court, but Commissioner Pete Rozelle fined Noll anyway for saying that.
Yeah, so. And I don't blame him. I mean, of course, you've got the famous Darryl Stingley preseason play that ended up him being paralyzed for life. And I think, from my understanding, I think it was Jack Tatum that hit him, or was it Atkinson? I think it was Tatum.
No, it was Tatum.
And from my understanding, he never apologized to him to the day Stingley passed.
I know that Tatum tried to visit him in the hospital, but the Stingley family said, no, you're not allowed in here. And so that was the end of it. I don't know how you do that and not want to apologize. I just
absolutely.
I don't know.
I mean, there's one thing about hard hitting, and there's another thing that's purposeful hitting, where you're trying to hurt somebody. And then there's the other famous one pre-1970s with Frank Gifford. And I can't remember who it was that hit him, but
Chuck Bednarik.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Chuck Bednarik, and he was out cold, and I think that actually ruined his career after that. He was never the same.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, you didn't see. Well, of course, the Giants as a whole didn't win after '63. They weren't really that good anymore until really, early '80s with Bill Parcells. So they went a long drought without winning.
Younger listeners may not believe it, but clotheslining was legal back then. So if you go back and look at old films, you'll see plenty of clothesline hits. And I mean, they're kind of fun to watch, but you feel for the guy that's taking the brunt of the hit. But it was a rougher technology as far as the game was concerned. A lot of the mindset. Take a look at the Pro Bowl. Back in the 70s, if you were a member of the winning team, there was a time where you got $5,000 to win in the Pro Bowl, and if you lost, you got $2,500. Now, we laugh at that today, but look at the Pro Bowl today. It's a joke. It's a complete joke. And I don't watch it anymore, and I know a lot of people that are like me. They don't watch it because we remember. No,
I remember a story of that Howie Long, the great Raiders Hall of Famer, said he got a chance finally to play on the same team with Jack Lambert, and Jack Lambert, he treated the Pro Bowl like it was a playoff game. Jack Lambert didn't care. He was going to, and today you don't see the Pro Bowl as that like that today. I remember I was stationed out in Hawaii when I was in the Army, and I got a chance to see one of the Pro Bowls out there. And the day before the game, they have practice the day before the game, and I knew that the players weren't taking this too seriously when Steve Young, the quarterback of the 49ers, was out there in his flip-flops.
Oh, so,
no. During the practice, that was the practice, and so I realized that, the Pro Bowl ain't what it used to be.
No, I'm on your side with that. I think they should just do away with it because they've made such a farce out of it. It's not worth watching. It's not worth playing. These guys are all afraid of getting hurt. So
I'm sure the ratings aren't that good on it.
Oh, it can't be. It's a joke. And I think the tide started to turn when players were like, well, do I want to go out there and get hurt? And I think they used to have it after the Super Bowl. Then they started trying to run it before the Super Bowl. And obviously, guys that are
Mhm.
going to the Super Bowl aren't going to play in the game. So you're taking away
Right.
some of the talent as well. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
joke. Really, really a shame, but because it used to be a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, going back to the hitting in today's day and age, it's got to be difficult to be a defender in the NFL because you can't do many of the things that same defenders playing back in the 70s and prior to that were able to do. I mean, you
Right.
just barely touch guys sometimes and you're getting called for personal foul or, pass interference. It's really ridiculous.
And the wide receivers back prior to 1978, my hat's off to them because they earn their pay. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a friend of mine who played for the Atlanta Falcons, Ken Burrow, told me about a
Mm-hmm. I know him.
'74 Monday night game. He
Mm-hmm.
played in a '74 Monday night game at Pittsburgh, and he said he went up to jump up for a pass, and by the time his feet landed on the ground, he felt like he was in a fight just for the
Oh,
ball.
gosh.
I mean, yeah, and so it's the wide receivers back at that time. They earn their pay.
Oh, yeah. And I think you were allowed to hit receivers at the line, too, or coming off the line, before they started their routes. So today you got to maintain a distance between them. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
And it was called the bump and run defense. It should have been the hit and run
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
they were hitting them.
Yeah. And our Steelers had a guy out there in the secondary that you did not want to run up against, Mel Blount. He would blast you into the next world.
You
He
had
was
more
such a
than
hard hitter.
you had him. You had Donnie Shell. He wasn't
Mm-hmm.
nicknamed the Torpedo for nothing.
Yeah,
Trust me.
exactly.
He broke Earl Campbell's ribs.
You're reading my mind, Joe. That's the way I was just about to mention that. So,
Yeah.
because I still remember seeing that play, and he had Campbell turning the wrong way and came in with a hit. And man, did he blast him.
Yeah, you have to hit a person just right to do that kind of damage
Mm-hmm.
to a man that size, and he did.
Yeah. Yeah. And Shell finally got what he deserved getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. It was a long time coming. And
Yeah.
while we're on that topic, too, what do you think about L.C. Greenwood not being in that Hall of Fame? We're adamant, us Steeler fans, that he belongs there.
There was a lot of guys that belong there that should have been inducted generations ago. I mean, or at least decades ago. And it's a shame. LC's one. Of course, Randy
Mm-hmm.
Gradishar is another. Hopefully, he'll finally get in.
Yeah.
With this coming class. But
Mm-hmm.
there's guys that I believe, and I'm not going to name names that I don't think deserve to be in today, but they're in.
Absolutely.
But there's guys that should have been in many years ago that aren't even being thought of, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
shame. And I hearken back to when Jerry Kramer of the Packers had to wait so many decades to get in, and the reasoning
Yeah.
behind that I found out was that a lot of the selection committee felt at that time that there were already too many Packers from the 1960s in there as it was. And I'm thinking, I bet you that's what's keeping L.C. Greenwood out because somebody's
Mm-hmm.
saying, there's too many Steelers from the 70s that are already in there. And I
Well,
hope that's not the case, but you have to wonder. There's guys in there, like I said, that don't even come within a whisper of somebody like an L.C.
mm-hmm.
Greenwood or a Randy Gradishar, and I just don't understand how they're being passed by. I don't know.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, that they're not letting more Steelers in because there's so many in there, there's still other players you can make a case for as well. And in fact, somebody you just mentioned before, Rocky Bleier, could very well be considered just based on merit and for his efforts and what he accomplished coming back from Vietnam. Hanratty told a very interesting story about that when he returned from Vietnam with the leg injuries, he was hobbling around and Terry had him over his house. And he said, man, don't worry about football. Just go find a career, whatever else. And Rocky's like, no, I'm going to play football. And they said that Art Rooney came to him and told him, listen, you really shouldn't play. I'll pay for your education. You go get a degree. And Rocky says, no, I'm playing football. And look what he accomplished. I mean, it's incredible. So
I know another little story about that. Rocky was at the point where he was figuring he was going to get cut from the team. This is after he came back from Vietnam. And Andy Russell, the linebacker, said, look, don't you dare walk out. Don't you dare quit. If you're going to get cut from the team, let the coaches cut you. Don't you dare give them a reason to cut you. And he didn't. And he stayed on. And he was like one of the last players to make the team. I believe it was in 71. It could have been something like that. And we all know the rest is history.
Yeah. And I mean, he and Franco had one season where they both had 1,000 yards rushing. So he's got accomplishments. So, I mean, like I said, there's so many Steelers in the Hall of Fame. Yes, but there's other guys that could be considered. Dwight White was a great player. Andy Russell was a great linebacker. Unfortunately, he was playing earlier than most of these guys in the 70s, but there are a lot of great players there. And we've got guys that are going to be going in down the road here. Ben Roethlisberger's a shoo-in. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame one day.
So should James Harrison, by the way.
You think? That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a great player.
I think.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of Pete Prisco, CBS Sports.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I used to listen to him. He used to be on the radio here. I think he still is. And I called him up once, and we were talking about Hines Ward. And so we had a gentleman's bet over a beer. And Pete said, he'll never be in the Hall of Fame. I said, you're wrong. I said, Stu is going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. And we'll see. I mean, he's been nominated, I think, a couple of times. But he holds a lot of the Steelers' receiving records. So why, my argument is that if Lynn Swann and John Stallworth are in there and they have lesser numbers than Hines Ward, how does Hines Ward not belong in the Hall of Fame?
They make the argument that it's a different game, and it is.
Yeah.
But I like you. I don't believe that numbers are everything. I think
sure.
What Hines. Hines Ward was one of the best blocking wide receivers that the NFL ever saw.
Absolutely.
I'm going way back into the birth of the league. You did not want to get hit by Hines Ward, a blindside hit.
That's right.
And I'm not even sure if that's legal anymore. The way he was hitting people. It's a different.
And on that subject, I always bring up Keith Rivers, Cincinnati Bengals. And if anybody has never seen that play, Google it, and that's where he came up with his line, you got to keep your head on a swivel. Yeah. Because Keith Rivers was running a play and wasn't watching. Hines Ward was blocking, and he hit him so hard he broke his jaw. It's crazy. And apparently some of the members of the Baltimore Ravens used to really actually want to hurt Hines Ward for the hits he used to put on them.
Yeah. That's in a way it's kind of respectful. Hey, we respect you that much that we want to go out and hit you.
Yeah. And the Steelers had another guy, Charles Johnson, a wide receiver, that was almost as good a blocker as Hines Ward was when he was playing.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the same vein, in early 70s, J.D. Hill of the Buffalo Bills was great at that too. They called him Crackback Hill because of his crackback blocks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the game has certainly changed. Well, Joe, your past represents an interesting background from the Army to school teacher, obviously a sports writer. But what were your responsibilities in the Army, and what did you teach as a teacher?
In the Army, I was in field artillery, combat arms, cannon crew member, and kind of graduated from there to eventually become the battery commander's driver of the headquarters battery in 3-7 field artillery. And school teaching, I taught American history. I only did that for a couple of years in South Carolina and Maryland. and decided that it wasn't for me. So I joined the government and became a park ranger with the National Park Service, and did that for 22 years.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. You're a park ranger. Where did you serve that role, and what was that experience like?
I worked in several different parks. I started at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, and did work at Hopewell Furnace National Historic Site in Pennsylvania in Berks County. Worked at Manassas National Battlefield in Virginia. Most recently, where I retired from, the Obed Wild and Scenic River in Tennessee. And my experience is I enjoyed it for the most part, but it was like any other job. Your job is a job, and you get to work with some very interesting people. And you get a chance to meet a lot of people in that type of work, in that type of environment. Not just people that you work with, but just general people that visit your park. And so it's typically a lot less stressful than being a school teacher, and I knew it would be. And that was a relief for me. But my career, and plural careers, you don't really plan for. You just, sometimes fate dictates you to go one way or another with your career decisions. And when you look back on them from so many years distance, you can see where you made mistakes, and you can see where you picked the right choice and things like that. And nobody's perfect, and you're going to make mistakes. I think that's the one lesson that you learn throughout life is you don't always make the right decisions, but how do you answer? How do you respond to that? That's the key decision that you make is how are you going to respond to what just happened to you? And that's true with football too. I mean, you can't dwell on one play. You gotta get your head back into the game and think about the next play.
Very true philosophy, and very well put, Joe. So I've heard of Pottstown, but where exactly in the state is that at? Because I'm from Pittsburgh, the west side.
Pottstown's about 1 hour northwest of Philadelphia. Okay. And of course, a lot of people who follow pro football know that there was a semi-pro team there in the late 60s, early 70s called the Pottstown Firebirds. And in fact, I found out through Bill Bradley that there were a couple of players on the Philadelphia Eagles that when they were placed on the practice squad, they would go up to Pottstown and play in their games and make an extra few $100s. Which back at that time was good money. Just here's a guy that's on a practice squad of an NFL team, and there were some players that started out semi-pro that played for different semi-pro teams that went on to pro teams. Bob Tucker is one who played in Pottstown, became the tight end for the New York Giants, did really well. Jack Dalbin is another who signed a contract with the Denver Broncos and played in Super Bowl 12. Wow. He played in Pottstown. So interesting. It's amazing how your careers can go in so many zigzag ways and end up, being beneficial. That's really a unique thing. But Pottstown when I lived there, it had about 25,000 people. Population. It's a little bit larger now, but it has all the same problems that a lot of towns do in that region, as far as crime and drugs and things like that. A lot of towns in that area, in that Philadelphia suburbs area, have sadly gone downhill. I haven't lived there in many years, but I still have family members that live up there.
How'd you settle in Tennessee?
Job with the Park Service.
Yeah. Okay.
I transferred from a job in Pennsylvania down to Tennessee, and been down. It was 2005 that I got into Tennessee, and so now we're at almost 2024. So
Wow.
I've been down here for a while. The roads are a lot better shape down here. You know,
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
it's funny because
we have potholes, but not like the potholes we had in Pennsylvania.
nah, it's funny because I took my wife up to Pittsburgh and she was commenting on potholes in the roads,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just a common thing. When I was growing up, you'd see them everywhere. It's just a pothole city.
When I
Speaking
first,
of Pittsburgh, you ever been there, Joe?
oh yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, Rocky Blyer and I did a book signing there at.
Okay.
It's not open anymore, but at Jerome Bettis's restaurant.
Oh yeah,
We
I've
did a
been
book,
there. Yeah.
delicious cheeseburgers. Oh, they were delicious. But
Uh,
unfortunately, it's closed up now, I'm told, and that's a shame. But yeah, I've got, I still have some friends that live up in the Pittsburgh area, and it's a really unique city.
yeah.
If you've ever gotten a chance to visit Pittsburgh, take your camera because it's so photogenic. It's a beautiful city.
Hmm. Well, listeners can't see it. I don't think you can see it, but behind me is the backdrop of the city view of Pittsburgh at night. So, when I do a live video, they'll be able to see it. But yeah, that just is my constant reminder of where I came from.
Yeah,
Uh, so, but the funny thing about Jerome Bettis' restaurant, and when I went in there one time, the unique thing I thought about it was when you go into the men's restroom,
yeah.
you can see out
You-
into the restaurant behind
Right,
the stalls. That's like one of the creepiest things ever. They can't see in, but you can see out, so you can be looking
yeah.
at people as you're using a
I, I,
urinal.
I, I that's the first thing that stuck to me. I'm thinking, why is that? Why do they have that? I mean, it's not like you can hear them call your name if your table is
Right,
waiting or anything like
right.
that.
It
But I never,
makes you wonder what was on Jerome's mind when he was designing that place.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I've never seen that in any other men's room in my entire life.
No, that was a first for me as well. And Rod Woodson also had a restaurant down there that I had visited at one time. So he had one. It was across the river. I think it was in Station Square, if I remember correctly. But yeah, Rod Woodson had a restaurant there as well.
Yeah,
So
any chance I can ever get to go up there, I try to take it if I can. Lately it hasn't been too available for me, but it's a great place.
Well, I've never been to Tennessee, but I understand it's a beautiful state. So
The first thing that struck me was, I couldn't believe it. The sun is so much brighter down here, and I'm wondering why is that? And I come from Pennsylvania, and I'm thinking, you know what? It's because there was no factories down here. There's no smog. And in Pennsylvania, the smog kind of blunts out a lot of the rays of the sun. And so the first time that you come down to Tennessee, you start thinking, I better get some sunglasses.
No. Well,
Yeah.
if anybody wants to see what Pittsburgh was like when the steel mills were active, go Google that because they've had days where you were standing downtown Pittsburgh in the middle of the day at noon, and it would look like
Yeah.
night because
Yeah.
of all the smog and stuff from the steel mills.
The soot. Yep.
Exactly. Well, Joe, you've primarily written about football, but are you a fan of other sports? Because all we've been talking about is football.
I like baseball and I like ice hockey. I don't write about them because I don't have a really good knowledge base of either, but I enjoy watching them. I'm a big fan of college football. But I would say, football, baseball, and ice hockey are my three favorites.
Do you have a favorite college football team?
Got several. I like BYU because I took a couple of undergrad courses there.
Cool.
I also, of course, my alma mater is Kutztown University of Pennsylvania.
Oh no,
Yeah.
that's who my alma mater's playing today.
Oh man,
I graduated from Slippery Rock. Oh no,
We're playing
they beat it.
Rock.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
This has been a huge year for both teams actually, but Slippery Rock has made it as high as fourth ranked in the country. And then when they
Mhm.
played in the PSAC championship, Kutztown beat them 21-7. I think the final score was. So today's the rematch.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so
yeah. I'm
we're
glad.
rivals today, Joe. I didn't realize you went to Kutztown. Oh my goodness, that's
Yeah,
funny.
well, because I mentioned that I'm pretty sure we're going to lose because I'm bad luck.
Well, Slippery Rock's made some deep runs in the past. We've never won a
Yeah.
national championship. We've gotten to the quarterfinals. I think we actually might have made it semis a couple of years back. And I'm actually trying to get a former player for the Rock that I graduated. Well, he graduated a year before me, I think, but we were friends. Rick Porter actually made the NFL, and he played for Detroit and a couple other teams. So right now I'm
We've
in the
had
hunt of
for a
yeah.
small school, we've had quite a good showing in the NFL. We have two players that have won Super Bowls, Doug
No kidding.
Dennison and John Mobley with the Broncos.
I know John
We,
Mobley. Yeah, it was Denver, right?
Andre Hall of Famer Andre Reed went to four straight
Wow.
Super Bowls with Buffalo. And then Bruce Harper, who played with the Jets. So
Yep.
we have some NFL representation,
Yeah.
but
And I think Slipper Rock's had a few
it's,
there too, but Rick I knew personally, so I'm trying to get him on the podcast.
mhm.
But that's funny. Had no idea that you went to Kutztown. So
Yeah,
we're,
yeah.
we'll have to talk later today and see who the winner is because whoever wins this game is going to be in the semifinals. So it's interesting.
A good friend of mine, his daughter is going to Kutztown right now, and she's in the marching band. And
Oh, wow.
if they win, she gets to travel wherever they go. Apparently, it might even be Texas. So,
Yeah, I remember last week. I was watching the scores last week. Kutztown was down deep in that game. I think they came back to win it at the end,
mhm.
but they were losing big. I think, and so Slippery Rock beat Tiffin University, who was heavily favored. So that was a huge upset, and they just didn't beat them. They scored 45 points on them. So
The,
um,
the,
I was
the deeper
surprised we
you,
lost to you guys the last week of the season, the championship game, because we have been mauling opponents all season long. I mean, scoring multiple points, many points,
you
and to
probably
only
you
get
rest.
7 up on the board.
I bet you rested all your starters. That's what I'm guessing.
That's what I was thinking. I'm hoping. Well, we'll see. It's
Yeah,
exciting for both of us, actually.
yeah.
So that's really cool. Um, but So, if you had to name one event, Joe, from the 1970s, no matter what sport it is, what one event sticks out in your mind the most?
Man, that's a loaded question. You know that endures to the test of time. I'd have to say Miami's undefeated season of '72,
Mm-hmm.
because here we
Mm-hmm.
are, well over 50 years, and we're still talking about it, and
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't been broken yet. And you can say to a casual football fan, "Oh, what do you know about the '72 Dolphins? Oh, they went undefeated." It's almost like it's a second nature response to a young person. Oh, yeah, it's like it's passed down from generations. Um, a close second would be the Immaculate Reception. Those
Yeah.
two things, I would say, one and two, because they still get talked about. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd be willing to guess with today's, media, with NFL films, they're going to be talked about for many years to come.
Oh, yeah. And I don't think any NFL team is ever going to go undefeated. And I know we all know the Patriots came close
Yeah.
when they went undefeated in regular season, got to the Super Bowl. But obviously, come from Pittsburgh, they've knocked us out of the playoffs so many times. I'm not a fan of the Patriots, and so when that Super Bowl came around, I was rooting so hard for the Giants to pull that upset.
Me
And
too.
I honestly think when I saw Tom Brady walking out of the tunnel, he had this look on his face. I was like, he looks very nervous.
Mhm.
And so, sure enough, we know the end result, and Miami continues to be the only team, and they must have celebrated that day.
Boy, did they ever! Yeah, and I, I, I really don't. With the fact that they keep adding games to the regular season, now we're up to
Mm-hmm.
17. There's talk of there
Yeah.
being 18.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to be able to um, go 18 straight games, and then if you add the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
21 altogether with the Super Bowl, 21 straight
No.
games without losing once. You're really
Yeah.
bucking the odds with that.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So it's not on my agenda, but just came into my head, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on having a team overseas in London? Because there's been so much talk about that. I'm here in Jacksonville, and when they were on the downside before the last couple of years where they're starting to win now, there was all this talk about the Jaguars are going to be the team that they're going to send over to London to be a team over there. I mean, I don't think NFL Europe would work.
I'm against it personally. I think
Mm-hmm.
that the league is getting too big for its britches, so to speak. It's
Yeah,
such a any time that they go overseas, it's to make money. Okay,
absolutely.
don't let anybody kid you. That's what they're trying to do. And could it happen? Yeah, it could happen. Do I want it to happen? No, I do
No.
not. I don't like the fact that season ticket holders here in America have to forfeit one, or in Jacksonville's case, two
2 games.
regular
Mm-hmm.
season games because they can't afford to fly overseas and see their team play.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't happen, but I I would expect it to happen. Knowing Roger Goodell, I don't know him personally, but knowing
Mm-hmm.
the decisions that he has made, I wouldn't be surprised.
Like the league needs any more money already. But I'm in
Yeah.
total agreement with you. When they started talking about Jaguars playing over there on a regular basis, and I'm thinking to myself, just like you said, if I was a season ticket holder, I'd be ticked. I mean,
Yeah.
you're losing the 2 games that you're basically paying for. If anything, the NFL should be paying their airfare, hotel,
You know,
tickets, everything, and send them over there because
do you
that's
know
not
how
fair.
expensive? Do you know how expensive it is to watch an NFL game? To go to an NFL game today?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, it's several $100s.
sure.
Do you know in January 1976 at Super Bowl, you could
Hmm.
get in for $25. That's how much a ticket cost. Look at that's insane. A
Well,
Super Bowl and a good seat at a Super Bowl for
sure.
$25.
Hmm.
Today, you can't get a hot dog and a beer hardly for
That's
25 bucks.
right.
That's how bad it is.
That's
Oh.
right. Well, you know what? When Super Bowl 43 was here in Tampa,
Mhm.
and I'm in Jacksonville, I'm like, oh my god, I've never been to I got to go. So a friend of mine and I went online to get tickets, $2,500 for my ticket, and it was not even a great seat. I was way up high
Yeah.
when Roethlisberger threw the Santonio Holmes touchdown pass to win the game. I couldn't see it. I was at the opposite end of the stadium, so I had to watch it on the jumbotron.
Wow.
But it cost me $2,500 for a ticket, and that was what Super Bowl 43 is now, like 10 years ago or so, something like that.
I know
So
people that were taking out second mortgages to their houses
yeah,
for Super Bowls, and I'm thinking, are you crazy?
mm-hmm.
Are you out of your mind? For a 4 hour extravaganza that
Mm-hmm.
you're never, I mean, and you're not guaranteed that your team's going to win, you
Right,
know. Uh, uh,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, trust
It's
me. Had Santonio Holmes not made that catch, I would have been leaving that stadium very disappointed because I told Joe last week when we were interviewing the other Joe, who's a Cardinals fan, that when Larry Fitzgerald scored that touchdown, my heart sank. I was like, oh God, we're going to lose. Um, so
yeah,
it
yeah.
would not have
That
been
was
worth $2,500.
no, it wouldn't have. Yeah, at least you got a chance to celebrate at the end.
Yeah. So to round out this conversation, Joe, just tell our listeners about any new books you might be writing or the ones we haven't talked about or any projects you're working on and what it means to you to be part of this great sports history network.
Well, first of all, I'll answer your second question first. I was very very fortunate to get a chance to hook up with Arnie, and who runs the Sports History Network, and I'm very thankful that he gave me an opportunity to do a podcast. And I can't even remember how it started. I really can't. I mean, but I'm in contact with a lot of different people, and I'm sure that's how it started. But I'm very fortunate that I got a chance to meet him. He's a great guy, and we hit it off. And he's really happy today because he's a Lions fan, Detroit Lions, and his team is having a great year. They're having their best year in many, many years.
Absolutely.
What I'm working on now, well, I finished the Bill Bradley book, and now we're working on editing it and that sort of thing. I finished the book on Larry Little of the Miami Dolphins. Now we're editing that. And then we're in the final stages of the 73 Buffalo Bills book. And I got a chance to interview O.J. Simpson for that. And that was kind of unique. Yeah. And that was, I'll tell you a story about that. I sent him a copy of my first book on the NFL in the 1970s while he was incarcerated in Nevada. But I never found it. I never found out if he got the book for the longest time. And I kept trying to get him to go and do an interview, but I never received any response. Finally, I realized, you know what? Maybe I'm doing this the wrong way. And I somehow found out who his manager was. I can't even remember how I found out. And I contacted his manager. And that started a dialogue between me and his manager. And he said, okay, and this is after OJ had been released from prison. We'll let you interview him, but you got to submit your questions ahead of time. I said, no problem. Yeah. So I submitted my questions. And then on the day of the interview, his manager told me, now, look, I'm going to put you on with him. But if you mention anything about the 1990s, the phone call you'll be hung up on immediately. Wow. And I said, don't worry, I won't. I'm not going to betray that trust. So I got a chance to talk to O.J. Simpson for about 45 minutes. Wow. And it was really unique. And a lot of the things that he said are going to be in the book. And what's really kind of unique about that book is that I had to address the topic of the 1990s in some way. So I asked his teammates, and most of them wouldn't go on the record. But two of them that did, both had two different opinions. One thought that he was guilty, and one thought that he wasn't. And so,
interesting.
Yeah. And so that book's going to be coming out pretty soon. And of course, my Facebook page, the NFL.
And we're talking about guilty of the first crime, right?
Correct.
The first,
the murders, right?
Okay.
The Facebook page, the NFL in the 1970s, I started that on a whim, kind of like as a companion to the book, The NFL in the 1970s, that I wrote. And it's taken off to the point that now we're approaching 10,000 followers. And I'm really proud of that, because I get a chance to interact with so many different fans who I didn't realize loved the 1970s in the NFL like I do. When you get to that point, man. And then there's always something to write about. We talk about stadiums. We talk about famous events. I try to ask a different trivia question every other day. So I'm always putting new stuff up on it, and the fans are enjoying it,
Yeah.
So that's what
I just did a podcast last weekend on, I'm sorry. I did a podcast last weekend on baseball stadiums that are no longer around. So that was kind of interesting. Ones that have been torn down, Ebbets Field, those kind of things,
Yeah.
So, Joe, with every guest, I give them the opportunity, give us some last final thoughts. So if you want to give the address for the, your Facebook page and whatever else you might be able to provide us with on a social network type of thing. And I encourage all our listeners to look up Sports History Network, because not just Joe's podcast and my own, but there's many other very interesting topics on Sports History Network by an array of hosts. But Joe, just give us some final thoughts and any social network locations they can find you on.
Okay, Harv. The Facebook page that you can contact me is the NFL in the 1970s. And also, like you said, the Sports History Network. And I have a monthly podcast that comes out once a month. And Arnie decides on when that is. It's usually on a Monday when he releases it. So I'll also, I don't really, give out my own personal contact information, but through those two venues, you can find me. I just want to thank you, Harv, and for all of your listeners for checking this podcast out, finding out a little bit about me and about my love for the 1970s in the NFL. There's a lot of different stories there. I try to address as many as I can, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Even we talked about the Darryl Stingley, Jack Tatum hit incident just a few weeks ago on it, and people are invited.
Interesting.
People are invited to chime in with your opinions, and one thing I do not accept though is when you start calling other people names. That's when I cut you off, because
Sure.
we believe in everybody's opinion is important. And as long as it's clean, you don't use profanity, we're welcome to read it and to have it, and explore different eras in sports. Don't be stuck on today. Look into the past and keep the past alive. Some people say, "Well, you're living in the past." Well, so what? It's what brings a lot of us happiness, and we've got almost 10,000 followers on our Facebook page, the NFL in the 1970s, and we must be doing something right, because they're not growing by accident. So,
right. And I always say it, I feel fortunate that I was lucky enough to grow up in the 70s, because again, like I've said before, it was the best era of sports, in my opinion. It seems like it's your opinion, a lot of people's opinions. That definitely was the best decade ever. And you're talking about living in the past. Well, the Steelers fans often get accused of bragging about the 4 Super Bowls in the 70s. And that was a history. That was a long time ago. Well, so what? They did it. And they were one of the most dominant teams in the 70s. So why shouldn't we be proud of that and talk about it and bring it up?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, folks, it's been a pleasure to have. Yeah, go ahead, Joe. What are you saying?
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joe, thank you. It's been a pleasure to have Joe Zagorski visit Total Sports Recall. Joe is just one of a handful of podcasters, as we mentioned, on the Sports History Network. So be sure to visit the website to discover the other podcasters in the network. For Joe Zagorski, this is your host, Harv Aronson. And if you wish to reach me with any comments, questions, suggestions, or anything else, feel free to email me at totalsportsrecall@gmail.com or on my Twitter page using the handle @TSRHar59. Be sure as well to visit my website at totalsportsrecall.com and my YouTube channel, Total Sports Recall. Until next weekend, when another podcast will be presented, for Joe Zagorski, this is Harv Aronson saying, have a wonderful week ahead.
The contents of this podcast do not represent the opinions of others and are solely the opinions of Harv Aronson based on his experience, knowledge, and research.